What's up, you guys? If you're watching this, you are about to watch a pre-recorded video from our Land Scaling Summit 2024. If you enjoy it, please like and subscribe. You're going to see down below, we actually have a free school community to talk about scaling up your acquisitions. So if you're a land investor that is looking to grow the acquisition side of your business, if you're looking to close more deals, then go ahead, join our free school community. But with that, go ahead and check out this video. Hope you enjoy. Thanks.
All right, so I want to ask, is anybody here a fan of the Backstreet Boys? Yeah? Okay, so can you do me a favor? When I say everybody, can you say yeah? So I'm going to say, everybody, yeah. Rock your bodies. Yeah. All right, sweet, I got your attention. All right, awesome. If you could, please grab your seats. We're going to get started here in a second. If you didn't know, this slot was supposed to be filled with our dear Mrs. Jenny Hudspeth. She is currently 37 weeks pregnant and did not get cleared by her doctor to fly out here, unfortunately. She's okay, as far as we know. She's been keeping me updated. We had a great conversation Wednesday night. But the short of it is she couldn't be out here. So we're doing a little bit of a flex during this time. I spent about 12 minutes this morning whipping together this very rough presentation for everybody. But I just want this to be an open discussion on sales and sales process. I feel like this has been something I've been talking about more and more this past year. I didn't realize how many people were so interested and passionate about it. And so what I'm going to do is I'll spend about 15 or 20 minutes just talking about how we've engineered some of our scripts to have an objectionless conversation, is what we call it. And so we're going to go through that, and then it's just going to be an open Q&A on sales and sales process. I want people to ask me any and all questions on sales. I may pull some of you in that are really good on sales. Jacques, if Anshal's still here, I know a couple of guys in here are crushing it. So definitely just want to pull all the minds we have together in this room. But with that, remind me, Tintin, where are my bounds? Where am I allowed to walk? I got yelled at in my first presentation. So is it this box and that box? Is that it? I pace a lot, guys. Ask Aaron. I'm always pacing around the house. And then I'm like, can we crank out the AC? It's hot in here for some reason. But with that, we'll get kicked off. So I'll tell you guys, I was just having a good conversation with Robert Johnson and Zach Nahas a second ago about how I feel like there's just a lot of gaps in the land niche in terms of education. And this is one that I stumbled into accidentally, where I feel like, a lot of people learn how to create leads, how to get the machine going, but a lot of people struggle to convert them. And I feel like I heard themes a lot this past year as, it's gotten a little bit more difficult with our sellers wanting sky-high prices of Ajay, I'm not getting deals, I'm having trouble locking stuff up. There's all the sellers want above market value. And yeah, a lot of them do, but that doesn't mean a lot of them won't sell it below market value, okay? And so I've talked a lot at length before about, how we structure our entire sales conversation. I'm just gonna spend this time getting into how to have what I call an objectionless conversation. So, quick agenda here. I want to talk briefly about the importance of the price drop, meaning when in the conversation we start talking price. Number two, what each objection sounds like. And while we're looking at that, how to overcome those objections, okay? So with that, we're going to dive on in. Number one, timing's everything, okay? And what I mean by that is where we start talking price is so important for our conversation. If anyone here is a Samuel Jackson fan, I love this meme of TikTok, Mother Clucker, but wanted to stay appropriate here because I know there are kids in the room. There are no kids in the room, that's a joke. But, what we learned early in us rolling out our first version of script, I remember having a good one-on-one with Veronica, and she was telling me, hey, when I start talking price earlier in the conversation, our sellers get really wound up. I feel their buttholes pucker. Okay, she didn't say that verbatim, but they get real taut and they get defensive and they just stop talking to you, right? And so I was like, all right, well, let's move it. Shove it later in the script then, right? And what we realized as I was listening to her calls, we were doing reviews, I was jumping back on the phones, is this concept I learned from Eric Brewer. He's a big sales trainer. I think he teaches, I don't know what his sales name is, but he teaches people how to do a lot of innovations and stuff. He's out of Pennsylvania, crushes it. But he says the goal around when you're doing the price drop is basically just to not get hung up on, right? Because I joke with folks a lot. Basically, what we do for a living in land is make lowball offers, right? Now, it's not essentially true. It's an oversimplification, but at some level, all we do all day is offer people 30 to 60 cents on the dollar on their properties, right? And so there's got to be a science on how we're delivering that so that we can boost the odds of them, number one, not hanging up on us, because I can't have a conversation, overcome objections, move conversations forward if we're not talking, right? And they're not picking up my triple dial after they hung up on me. Trust me, I've tried. Hey, George, we just got disconnected. Doesn't work very well. And so we realized timing is everything in that, right? And I'll just go through briefly. I've got tons of presentations and I've done tons of podcasts on our whole process. But I also just want to call out, like, early in our script, something we do is framing. And I'm eyeing our friend Matt over here because I've been working with Indy and Matt the past couple of months as they've been scaling up their sales process. Because we all know, you get on the phone with sellers and gosh, what do we get 40% of the time? Well, what's your offer? Right? And so before we start talking price, I just want to tell them how the conversation's going to go. Because if I set the stage, they can't hit me with that, right? Now, you always want to acknowledge what the seller's saying, right? So, like, if they're just like, hey, what's your price? I'm like, hey, I totally understand. I want to get to that part of the conversation. I will say, though, Robert, before we can do that, I just need to ask a couple of clarifying questions, and then we'll get into price, right? And so you just need the ability to tell them how the flow of the conversation is going to go before they can ever do that. Ideally, early in the conversation, right? You're hitting them with an opener. Hey, it's Ajay. What's up, George? Is this a good time to hit you for a few minutes? Yeah, what's this about? I'm following up about your property, blah, blah, blah. You have 5 minutes to chat? Yeah, I do. Okay, sweet. How this is going to go is I'm going to ask you a couple clarifying questions, just make sure I understand some things, and then we'll get in to see if we can strike up a deal, talk about a price, work through an offer, whatever you want to do. We're always changing up the language kind of in there of like how we call the offer, price, deal thing. But you tell them how the conversation's going to go, okay? And I always say it like this too. Anybody in here have kids? Just show of hands. Okay. I don't yet, but I've been around a lot of them, and one concept I understand pretty well is kids sometimes look up to you to know how they should be feeling in the moment. Okay, and what I mean by that is, like, you know, when a 2-year-old falls over, first thing they do is look up at their parent. And if parent's concerned, oh my God, what does kids start doing? Crying, right? Versus if you're like, buddy, you're okay. Come on, get up, we're good. They're good. That doesn't change as we get older, it just looks different. But the theme here is that humans actually need to be told what you're going to be doing, how to feel, et cetera, okay? And that's really all framing is in the conversation early on, is you're just telling them the flow of how this is going to go so they can't hit you with, well, what's your offer? What's this? What's that? I always tell Veronica when we're doing sales trainings too, like, the goal of a lot of our conversation is to be on offense, which means I need to be the one asking questions. Anytime I'm answering questions, I'm playing defense, right? Offense wins games. That's not, and Kobe always said defense wins games. But at some level, you got to score to win, right? So with that, we noted timing's super important. In order for us to control the time of the price drop, we needed to have really, really good framing process, all right? So just early in your conversation, tell them when that's going to happen in your conversation so they don't hit you with, well, what's your offer? Now, don't get me wrong. You're going to get like a 10 to 15% of sellers who press on and they're like, screw you. Tell me the number, otherwise I want to hang up. But just try to work through it, right? Again, acknowledge it. Hey, totally understand. We want to get into that. We'll get there. I just need to ask a couple of quick clarifying questions first, right? And the reason for that is, like, the more talk time you've got, the more rapport you have. The more rapport you have, I always like to say it's like in a video game, like if you have a health bar, I call it the rapport meter. And so the longer you're talking, the higher that rapport meter goes. And the higher and higher it is, there's like a cutoff point, there's an inflection point where they almost feel bad hanging up on you after you've talked for a while, right? And so my goal is, hey, the longer we can talk, the more I can build up that rapport meter, the more I can learn about pain points, the more I can use things to, you know, understand the seller, understand the human, sell better, right? So with that, anyways, timing is everything. What we're doing too is we want to be able to call out what objections we might be getting in the future. I think Ormozy calls it an obstacle before the price drop and then an objection after, right? And they sound, we're going to walk through how each one of them sounds. But because we can identify what they sound like, we can overcome the obstacle ahead of time, or we can deal with the objection after the fact, but it's always a lot more powerful if we can do it ahead of time, okay? So the 4 that I'm about to lay out, I learned from Cole Gordon. There's a trillion different people that break out 3, 4 different types of objections in different ways. They're all about the same thing at the end of the day. We'll talk about what each one of those looks like, all right? So number 1, partner-spouse objection. If you've ever heard, I need to talk to my husband, I need to talk to my wife, keep in mind it's partner or spouse. So it can be, I need to talk to my brother, we're a part owner in the property. my mom actually owns the property and I need to check with her. It's just there's some other human that needs to give an okay before that can happen, all right? When we're thinking about this from an obstacle perspective, how can I identify whether there is somebody else who can say no? I can ask. Pretty simple, right? So in that conversation, typically when we're talking to our sellers, early on, and usually, so I've taught a lot of two-call close structure. Typically in our first call, we're going to ask something along the lines of like, is there anybody else on the deed? And we'll just keep it kind of more logical. But in our second conversation where we are going to do a price drop, that's a lot of where we're talking about, hey, and just so I understand, like Andy, if we were to strike up a deal today, is there anybody else that needs to approve this, or are we good to go? Is there anything preventing us from working together if we strike up a deal? And they'll tell you, well, I will need to talk to my husband. Okay, that makes sense. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we go ahead and just schedule a time for all three of us to do that, right? And I'm big on the scheduled appointments, but just try to get ahead of it because they can't hit you with, I need to talk to my spouse if you just schedule a conversation with them, right? And if it's like, oh, no, like, we're good, I'll be able to talk to him privately. Okay, that makes sense. Well, let me ask you, Andy, like, did you guys chat ahead of this? Do they know that you guys are, like, does your wife know that you want to sell the property? Yeah, she knows. And have you guys already chatted about, like, what you might be willing to sell it for? Yeah, we have. Okay, got it. And so, like, you can kind of start to overcome it or pre-frame it when that objection comes later on. I'm just like, well, before we got on the call, Andy, you said that your wife and you were in alignment, you were ready to go, and blah, 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 right? But before it ever happens, if we can ask, we can address it, we can overcome it. After it hits, a little bit trickier, right? And the verbiage I like to teach is once it does come, right? So once we hit, I need to talk to my husband. If we can isolate it, that's step one before trying to overcome. You hear that all the time in sales training, right? Like, isolate the objection and then overcome it. And I'm like, oh, that sounds so good, but nobody actually knows what that means, right? And so here's what that looks like. Is if I had heard I need to talk to my wife, I'd be like, okay, well, Andy, let me ask you, have you and your wife already had a conversation about this? Yes. Got it. So is the only thing preventing us from working together just this conversation with your wife? Yes or no, right? Is that the only thing preventing us? I want like a yes, that is the only thing preventing us. Got it. And I'll double isolate, right? And I think the term in sales there is called a tie down, where I'm basically like trying to wrap it up in a bow and tie it down and say, this is the thing, right? Got it. So just so I understand, the only thing preventing you and I from working together is just your wife's blessing? Got it. Well, let me ask, why do you think she wouldn't want to approve this deal? Why do you think she'd be against us working together, right? And a lot of times that'll trigger either the real objection, if it's actually, well, I think she just wants more money. Oh, so now we got a price objection. That's a whole separate conversation, right? Because a lot of times people will throw this up as smoke screen and mirrors. But if we can isolate it and it really is just a husband-wife thing, well, then you can start to drill down on that and be like, okay, well, you guys probably live together, right? Haha, yes. And like if you try all the things on the call to get him to sign then, well, you guys already talked ahead of time. Were you aligned on price? Okay, so why do you think she'd be against it? Well, she wouldn't. Okay, well then I guess what's preventing us from getting this signed today? Just press on it. But if we get to a place where they're really combative, again, I don't want to fight my sellers. But what I will do is I will set up an appointment and be like, hey, well, got it. Well, Andy, you probably live with your wife, right? Usually gets a laugh, right? Okay, so should I assume you guys are planning on chatting sometime tonight? Yeah, great. What's the best time for us to connect tomorrow? Use assumptive language to set that appointment. What's the best time to talk tomorrow? Bada bing, bada boom, you're on. Ideally, they answer the phone in that next call. A lot of times you will get drop-off. Again, my goal is to limit what we call drop-off points. Anytime a seller could not get back to us is a risk, right? And so the more points we have in our process, the more risk there is for us to lose that lead, right? But that's partner spouse. I'm supposed to be going faster than this. Next is certainty, okay? And what certainty means is, if anybody here is a big Alex Hormozy fan, he's got his big value equation, right? That value equation, one of the variables in it is the customer's perceived likelihood of achievement, okay? And what that really means in layman's terms is, does this human think that I am going to deliver on the promise I've made to them? Okay, so does the seller believe when I say, hi, Ben, I'm going to buy your property for 25 grand, does Ben believe I have the money? Does Ben believe I'm going to fulfill? Does Ben think I'm going to do something funky, right? Do they actually believe it? And it's the toughest one to isolate because I need to think about it. Is so abstract overall. And so we build more process in, right? Like I try to get contracts signed live, because if it's something that's in the contract that makes them at ease, we can know. Again, I like the prevention isolation is what I like a lot of, just like, hey, well, if we were able to come to terms today, is there anything preventing us from working together, right? Ways we can avoid this too is by building brand authority and trust. Like for us, typically before we do the price drop, we're going to talk about what we call the pitch, which is whenever we as investors say the whole like, hey, just so you know, I've been doing land for 25 years, and in that time I've closed 1 million transactions, and we work with reputable title companies, and you don't need to pay any closing costs, and there's no realtor fees. This will be the easiest transaction of your life. You know that whole spiel that we all still have in our scripts. It's that, right? Make it sound better and more professional. But essentially the goal is for them to think you're a legitimate company, right? The tough thing is with uncertainty breeds fear, is what Jenny always tells us, right? Uncertainty breeds fear. And when you're scared of stuff, you just don't do anything because you don't know what's happening next, right? Like fear at a certain level is just like an uncertainty of what's going to happen. Typically, you're not scared of things that you know how they're going to play out. You're more scared of like what happens after a lot of times. And so your seller's not scared of signing your contract. They're scared of what happens after. Is this actually going to happen? Am I going to be locked into this big contract? What's going on, right? And so just like explain to them what's going on. A lot of times, that uncertainty breeds inaction, and that manifests in them ghosting us or opening the contract 16 times or a combination of both, right? And then they might throw up a different smoke screen of like, oh, well, I need to talk to my husband or, whatever. But essentially that's what uncertainty sounds like. That's what it looks like. We try to get ahead of it by building brand and authority ahead of time. Something I think it's Anshul, you do, you've got little like brand cards or something, if I remember, like while you're on the phone with people, you guys will send them like cool little graphics you have via text message, right? So there's all kinds of stuff you can do. Something Ben and I have done historically is we'll do a customer journey roadmap with every DocuSign. So it's like this, and we made it so the graphic design was like 10 years ago on purpose because our sellers are so old. But it's basically like this ugly road thing that we have. And it's got like 6 different points of like how the seller is going to be working with us. Because again, I'm just trying to figure out like what are all the questions I would have if some Yahoo randomly texted me and then told me they'd give me 50 G's for a piece of land that I haven't been to in 6 years. And I'm like, how do you even know I own this thing, right? Like try to get in your seller's shoes. Again, talk to your customers to figure out what they're thinking. And how can I get ahead of as much of that as possible, right? So that's uncertainty. Sounds like I need to think about it. Next, we've got timing, which timing is a tricky one. I like to use timing and price as a sliding scale if I can. We'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like here in a bit. What that sounds like is like, okay, well, hey, like grandma just died. We're going to need to get the stuff out of the house before we can do it. Or I'm going through a divorce and like these things need to happen. Or like now's just not a great time. Like typically some event happened and some other thing needs to be completed before they feel comfortable doing it. And a lot of times, to be honest, it actually has nothing to do with the ancillary event they're talking about. A lot of times, they just have so much going on with this core event they're telling you that they just don't want to make any big decisions right now. And so it really helps to just talk them through it, right? And so like, if I were sitting down with a buddy and he was like, oh, dude, I can't sell my property until like my, grandma's funeral. And I'd be like, oh, like those things don't seem related in my head, right? I'd obviously be sensitive about it and like be a good human and be empathetic. But I'd be like, hey, I'm so sorry to hear about your grandma. I had no idea. Can I ask, was your grandma involved with the property? Well, no. Okay. So help me understand like what exactly needs to happen before you can sell the property, right? And a lot of times like you're just trying to get them to think. I think one of my favorite principles from How to Win Friends and Influence People is make people think ideas are their own. And so if we can do that with our sellers, make them think the idea of moving forward is their own, they're a lot easier to work with, right? So if it's a timing thing, just be like, okay, well, like what exactly about this event needs to happen for us to move forward? Not a whole lot. Okay. So I guess what's preventing us from beginning the process today? Actually, nothing. Okay. Well, then is there anything preventing us from working together today? No. Sweet. Walk them through next steps. Now, they don't all happen that way. Okay. There's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen. But in the least, there's a good 30 to 40% of timing objections that turn into contracts, I would say. Again, ahead of time, so what that's going to sound like, if we're trying to get ahead of it and have the objectionless conversation, is, hey, Andy, Andy, I keep picking on you, dude. You're just like right in front of me, so it's really easy to look at you. But ahead of time, it's, hey, Andy, just so I understand, if we were able to strike up a deal on this property, like, are you prepared to begin that process in the next 30, 60, 90 days, whatever you need to do, whatever timing needs to happen for your business. We do a decent amount of double closing, so I think we'll typically say 90, right, Veronica? I'm looking at, I should have better grip on the sales process, but my team's really good at running the show, so we'll typically tell them, are you prepared to move forward in the next 90 days? If it's a yes, sweet, we know we're not going to hit this later on. Again, I'm just trying to figure out how I can get ahead of it ahead of time, okay? And this last one is the most common objection. You're all sitting here like, well, dude, that's part of those things are only part of the battle, right? Obviously, you've got price. And typically, that sounds like F you or no, and then a hang up, right? We're trying to prevent those if we can. Price is the trickiest to overcome from the perspective of like, I can't just like get this guy to want less if he's like really rock solid, right? But there are things we can do to test the waters, because a lot of times people give you a number because, again, like if some Yahoo randomly texted me about like my Honda CRV, I drive in style, guys. If somebody texted me about my Honda CRV and they were like, hey, dude, can I buy your car? I'd be like, who are you and why are you trying to buy my car? I'd be curious. I mean, if you wanted to give me way more than I paid for it, sure, right? Like I'm trying to get in the seller's shoes here of like, they bought a property 4 years ago. Maybe they use it, maybe they don't. Some random Yahoo hits them up. What are they thinking, right? And I know if it was me, I'd be like, well, shit, dude, yeah, I guess I'd sell my car for the right price. We hear that all the time, right? The cool thing is I drive my car every day. People don't use their land every day. So a lot of times if you're able to discover they don't actually use this thing every day, you can drill down on, so we address this in a couple different ways. The first one is figuring out what they would do with the money, right? And I say this a lot when I'm doing sales training with folks is if you were a car salesman and you were selling cars, right? And I had a mom and a dad with 4 kids come up to me and they were like, hey, we're looking to buy a car. I wouldn't be like, all right, let's go look at the Lambos, right? Right? I wouldn't be like, okay, let's go look at the Mini Coupes. Let's go look at, right? Like they need space, obviously. So I need to do discovery on what they're planning to use the car for, what their needs are. You do the same thing with your sellers. And like, depending on how straightforward you are in your sales, I like humor a lot. So I sell with humor a lot. It's more natural to me. I make a lot of jokes. A lot of people think I'm really funny. My wife does sometimes, not all the time, but a lot of people do think I'm really funny. That got like a 30% chuckle. I love it. So typically it's just gonna be like, okay, got it. And are you, sorry, I'm chuckling. I'm looking at it. I gotta tell you guys a quick side story. So we had this line in the script that I thought back to at one point. And scripts should be changed all the time, guys. You should always be working your script and making it better because people change and times change and marketing changes. But we had this line in the script when we were trying to get like, what would you do with the money? And the question was something to the effect of like, oh, like, are you gonna like buy another property or just like take your money and ride off into the sunset? And I remember we had hired this VA in Latin America, a really sweet girl. But she didn't quite understand the humor, and it definitely wasn't how she sold. And so I just remember Ben and I were reviewing this call, and she sounded like, are you just gonna take your money and run off into the sunset? And she said it so fast, and it was like, what did you just say? And the seller paused for 4 seconds, and then just said, what? Which is like the worst thing that can happen on a sales call. Because now you just feel like you lost all your rapport, right? So awkward. And she tried to get back from it and it was just gone. And so I bring that up to say, I sell with humor. You don't need to, okay? Sell whatever is natural to you. How you have conversations is also how you should sell, okay? It's gonna come across more authentically. It hits better. People respond to it better. Authenticity just shows. It's real. It's raw. People respond well to it, okay? So with that said, typically we like to ask at some level, like, okay, got it. People love to correct. And so what I'll teach you is like, oh, are you planning to buy another piece of land or do something else? And I'm like, oh, like, we're going to do something else. Oh, got it. Like, are you take a fun trip? Would you do anything with it? You know, I always love to learn what our customers, what our partners, what the people we work with end up doing after they sell their properties. Be curious. Be curious. If you can come to the seller out of genuine curiosity, again, authenticity shows, and they're a lot more likely to just talk to you like a human. So be curious, get the money out of them, and later on, if they hit you with, you know, F you, ha, 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 you might come back and be like, hey, listen, I understand, Mike, that this probably is less than you were thinking, but you did tell me you were looking to buy more patio furniture for you and your wife this year. I mean, how valuable would it be to you and your wife if you were able to do that in the next 60 days? Again, it doesn't work all the time, guys, but like I'm just trying to boost the probability of every lead and I doing business together. And so a lot of times we've gotten people to come around. I mean, gosh, Veronica and I, when we go through the pipeline, I can't tell you how many leads people hit us with an asking price of like 60 grand. She finagles the lead. By the end of it, we buy that thing for like 10 grand. and we sell it for 30. So like people are going to ask what they ask, but if you build good rapport, make a genuine offer, you'd be surprised at how many people work with you, okay? The other thing we're going to do so people don't hang up on us is usually after we've had a good chunk of rapport, and I think a lot of you heard me say this before, we'll shift blame and give a range, okay? So 2 things, shift blame and give a range. Write those down if you're not doing those already, all right? And what shift blame looks like is I'd be like, hey, Jesse, typically investors in our area are paying X to Y. I see other investors in this area are buying properties like this between X and Y. So see how that's not me. That's other investors. And I feel so good with that line because it's so authentic. I don't care what the asset class is. I don't care what the market is. I know in every market, in every country, in every asset class, some investor somewhere is buying some real estate asset for 40 cents on the dollar. I don't know how, but investors are always putting deals together. People have situations all the time. It just happens. So if I'm like looking at a $100,000 piece of land, I can say, hey, Jacques, I see investors in the area are paying around $40,000 to $45,000 for a property like this. What would you say to one of those investors if they made an offer like this? And you might get, I'd tell them to F off, right? And hey, totally understand. That's not what I'm offering you necessarily, but let me ask, it sounds like you've got a number in mind if you tell them to buzz off. So what's that look like? Again, I never go first on asking price because a lot of times sellers will volunteer a price much lower than I would have originally offered. Not all the time. Sometimes they come out with the moon. But the point here being, if I can get them to give me a price, now we know where the margin is, right? And so if I can then get to a number, again, if you have double closing in your tool belt, this is where price negotiations get really, really handy. Is let's say this property is worth $100,000. Originally they want, 105. I say investors are paying 40 to 45. Now we're going to play the looping game, right? When I say the looping game, I just mean got it. And you wouldn't consider an offer below 105. Well, I'd consider one. Okay, well, it sounds like you have a number in mind. Could you just tell me what the number is so I could work with my team, see what we can get you? Always make it seem like there's someone else if you can. Hey, I'm really fighting for you here, Jesse. I want to get you the most amount we can. Like, can you just help me know where you're at so I can see if we can make it happen, right? Just like talk to them. Tell them you're trying to help them. I always tell Veronica, make them think we're on the same team. Make them think we're on the same team. Make them think we're on the same team. One more time. Make them think we're on the same. Yeah. And if you can do that, people are a lot more receptive to working with you. And so, I would consider something under 105. Okay, got it. Like, what's that number, right? They may volunteer like a 90. And I'm like, sweet, we have some margin now. I'm going to loop again. Okay, got it. So if I came to you with an offer like $10 below 90, I shouldn't even send it your way. Be like, okay, well, I'd consider not. Okay, got it. Well, like, can you tell me, like, where's, you're just going to keep looping to try to get that bottom dollar out of them until eventually you hit them with, okay, so I shouldn't even consider calling you back if I can't get you an offer below that. And they're like, no, I wouldn't take a penny below that. I'm like, ding, ding, we got the number. And I still might hit them with an offer a little bit below it, right? Because you can always make an offer and people can tell you no, but if you get really close, they're going to consider it. Now, before I hit them with the actual price drop, I like to lead with 2 things if I'm going for a double close pitch, okay? And I'm going to make sure I don't get a timing objection because I'm going to need more time if I'm double closing typically. And I want to make sure I can isolate price, right? And so again, I like the prevention track. Hey, just so I understand, Veronica, there is nothing preventing us from working together aside from agreeing on price, aside from price. Price is the only thing preventing us from working together. If we were to strike a deal on price, nothing else would prevent us from working together. However you want to do it, right? And they're going to tell you, yep, nothing else. Okay, got it. And let me just ask, and here's what I do before I get in the double close pitch. Let me just ask, are you guys in a rush to sell the property? I like that a lot as a leading question because sellers get so defensive when you hit them with that, right? Because on the front side, they tell us all the time, I can hold on to it forever. Oh, the taxes are $20. I'm like, okay, great, sweet. Thanks, George, right? Cool, Bob. And so I'll hit them with, okay, are you in a rush to sell the property? 95% of the time, no, I'm not in a rush. Okay, got it. Well, I guess it seems like we might be able to work together. The terms just might look a little bit different than we originally talked about. Do you want to hear more about that? Yeah, sure, go ahead. Nobody's going to say no. And then you just walk them through your double close process. Have a very normal conversation. So like, again, we have like 16 different talk tracks on this. I feel like one of them is just like, okay, got it. Well, hey, like I said, we bought and sold over 100 properties in the past year. In that time, we've gotten really good at buying properties. We've also gotten really good at selling properties. And so typically what we do when like our acquisition price is a little bit higher than our risk tolerance is we may partner with some other buyers or leverage some marketing platforms to find another buyer and just make a little bit of a spread in between. Again, that whole thing doesn't matter for you. At the end of the day, a title company is going to ask you a wire check in 90 days. What questions do you have, right? No questions. Okay, got it. Well, you said the only thing preventing us from working together was price, so should I send over the paperwork? Or like, what's the best email to send the paperwork over to? Again, assume the sale, let it go, bada bing, bada boom. You might get some stuff, you might get some pushback, but for the most part, if you just assume the sale and track on, people are cool. Again, they've had the properties for 20 years. 90 days really doesn't make a difference to most people. And a lot of people tell me, like, man, I just had a conversation with Joe Schmidt. Where are you at, Joe? Raise your hand. What's up, Joe? You were just asking me about double close talk tracks, right? This is exactly how we do that when we're hitting the objections and playing the game. And it's like, man, if I just talk to sellers like a human and be authentic on exactly what we're doing, I almost never get pushback from them. Like, Anshul, I'm sure it's the same way for you guys, because you guys do almost exclusively double closings, right? Like, we just tell them what we're doing, and they're cool, right? It's when you don't tell them what they're doing that they get a whiff of you being inauthentic, and they're like, this dude's shady, I don't want to sign this, right? Can we get Anshul a mic? Jeff, can we turn this one on?
Double closing.
Yeah, I want to hear
So
this.
what we like said, like, hey, what you gonna do with my property, right?
Yep.
Like, you're gonna flip it, you're gonna keep it, like, what's going on? Say, hey, look, we have done 5 different things with properties we have ever acquired. Sometimes we keep it, sometimes we seller finance it, sometimes we wholesale them, sometimes we split them.
That's great.
Sometimes we do nothing and we cancel the contract because title is no good. I don't know what I'm gonna end up doing with this one, but my number one job is to get you paid in less than 90 days. Sign the contract.
That's
And
great.
because we don't know what we're gonna do with the property, sometimes it's a split property, so we're gonna go and split it. So I don't wanna say that I wanna wholesale or double close it, then I might splitting it or seller finance it. So that's it. So, oh, okay, that's too much information.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. With that, it was perfect time, which is why I was ready for it. But again, that's a quick little trick. That's 4 types of objections we run into. That's typically what they sound like from sellers. Try to get ahead of them. If you hear them, try to overcome them. Nothing too fancy, but it's something that I feel like I've had a lot of fun with, and I've gotten a lot of feedback that you guys have enjoyed it. I know Justin hit me up because of a podcast I did with our friend Kendall where I broke this stuff down, and I've had a lot of fun breaking this stuff down, so I'd love to hear you guys' questions on anything sales process, any of this stuff. Dave, what you got?
What about, I'm still ready to go to my kids.
Where, I guess, walk me through like when in the conversation that would happen.
Sure. So we're talking acquisition manager conversation, right? So we've discussed price, talked about the range or whatever, and they're like, they want way close to market price, let's say, right? But we're gonna offer 50 cents on the dollar, and they'll be like, I'll just let the property go to my kids. Yeah. I've heard this a lot lately.
Totally. I'm looking at Veronica. I almost want to put you on the spot, but I know you don't want that. Yeah, give Veronica a mic. I want to hear. I know you haven't done this in a second, but what do we do when people say I might give it to my kids?
I'll first ask them if they have even like asked their kids if they want the property. Usually they'll tell me no, that they haven't even like had that conversation with them. And if like the kids even like want that responsibility, like if they want to be responsible for the taxes, like all of that. And the majority of the time they will tell me no. So that's the first question that I will ask them once I get hit with, oh, I'll just leave it to my kids. Trying to think what else. Do you have anything to like?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think the other thing is the estate stuff. So like, is it in your will? You'll hit them with some of that as well.
Oh yeah,
Just,
I will
like-
clarify that with them also. So
Yeah, so we'll like hit a question of just like, okay, got it. And like, do you have that all legally set? So if something were to happen to you tomorrow, you know, your estate's in orders, essentially. And you've had what, like 4 people be like, oh my God, no, but thank you so much. I need to like call my attorney and get that straightened out, right? So like, hey, in the least, like, listen, if we already don't have the deal, we might as well just ask a couple more questions and see if we can make something out of it. I'm curious, can you think of any deals where that ended up turning into a deal? I don't know if I can explicitly, but in the least, like, we're just talking to humans, you know, so have the conversation. I bet you over a long enough time horizon, eventually one would pop. I had one actually with a property. I didn't end up buying because it was in Mojave, Arizona, and I didn't do a lot of work back then. I didn't know Drew very well back then. But this guy was a 25 grand property. We couldn't come to terms on price. He told me to go to his kids, and I asked if his kids had ever been out to the property, what they would do to take care of it. And he's like, well, to be honest, he basically like insulted them and was like, they don't do shit. And so they'd probably just let the taxes go, and then it would go to the county, and then it will, and then it would get auctioned off. And so I was like, got it. And I guess, is that what you want for your property? And he was like, well, no. And I was like, all right, well, then let's do the dang deal. And so we did. And again, I ended up not buying it, but it did get him to yes. So it was something. But again, I just say, just like have that conversation, right? What's up, Drew?
Jaron and Elliot and I had a seller in Tennessee with a really good objection, and I feel like we didn't have a great answer for it. His objection was, what happens if I get under contract with you and then the value increases? And did we have a good response to that? Not really. What would you say?
Well, let me ask, so I'm curious on some stuff before, but how long was this contract?
Yeah, that's a good point. It was for like a 12-month JV where we would lock in a price per acre for his land. He would get 20% of the upside, and we would catch the 80%. And it's a great objection because the value of his land could go up, and we just like. Yeah, and that we're giving him market value for his property as its current size. And it was just south of Nashville, so that area had seen massive appreciation already.
Sure.
And he's concerned that he would see it double again a year after he signed the contract with us.
Right. So it's funny how fear of loss happens there. My gut, so I don't know whether this is the best answer. My gut would almost be like, well, what if the value goes down? You know, I'm going to be honest with you here, Drew. We're taking on a lot of risk to take this down. We're going to have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get this to a place where we might be able to move it. If it was an entitlement deal, maybe hundreds of thousands, depending on engineering costs. And if the value does go down, we eat all that, right? If it goes up, we both make money. So let me ask you, Drew, I mean, is there something specific you're thinking through here? Like, what are you afraid of? You know, and I would address it head on and just see what they're thinking, but I would almost make them think of the other side. Like, Drew, have you looked at the news lately? Do you really think the values are going to continue going up, man?
And we did share that side of the argument. I just feel like we weren't as confident in that as we should have been.
So what ended up happening?
A lot of it actually ended up coming down to misunderstanding with the seller. He was a doctor and he was in cahoots with his attorney, and they were just going back and forth on stuff. So at the very end of it, Drew ends up, the doctor's like, oh, you're telling me I'm not getting $3.5 million at closing? You're not going to hand me all that cash? And we were like, dude, no. So we'd had everything outlined. I think we had like 3 different LOIs that we'd shared with him just to get to that point. So even valuation aside, it was just one thing after the next.
Got it. Yeah, that's tough. And honestly, when it starts to get to an attorney, with the more expensive in properties, they're more common. But like that's one up here that I would almost like put under uncertainty. That's what that sounds like, right? If somebody's like, hey, I need to go check with my attorney, I'm like gonna call BS most of the time. Again, with a $3 million deal, that makes more sense. But I know that's one we get a lot is I got to talk to my attorney. God, Veronica, how often do you think people don't actually have attorneys? Like 80% of the time? Yeah, 4 out of 5 times they don't have an attorney. And so my line, and I learned this from Clint Turner, was, oh, like we actually do a lot of business in the area and we know quite a few attorneys. Like, what's their name? I could just email it directly to them. And what you're doing there is just calling them on the BS to see if they've got one, right? And if they're like, bah, 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 then you're like, okay, sweet, I got you. And so then you just talk to them, again, like a human. Hey, listen, like, Justin, if you want to hire an attorney, more power to you, man. I'll tell you, most of them are going to charge you $300 to $500 an hour just to tell you that this contract's really simple. The cool thing about our contract is we make it so simple, anyone can read it. Why don't we just go over it together? I can answer any questions you have. And if you're still uncomfortable at the end of that conversation, I'm not going to make you do anything you're not comfortable doing, right? Again, like just talk to them like a person. Like, dude, I'm not going to twist your arm here. Like, let's just talk.
So I had a similar situation and quite a few with sellers and say, hey, the property's value will go up. I'm like, of course they will go up. That's the only reason I'm buying it. I mean, I would not get in a deal when I buy it from you, the property value start going down. I mean, so what do you want to do with this? I mean, if you wait for 10 years, they will go up. I'm telling you right now.
Right.
So do you want to wait for 10 years? Do you want to wait for 1 year, 6 months? Pick a timeline. Or you want to get this done now?
Yeah.
Because I'm not picking a property that I buy from you and the property value start going down. That doesn't sound like a good investment for me.
I love that.
I mean, that's it.
That's great.
I mean, I agree.
It's simple and straightforward, right? It's
agree
just like,
with
well, yeah, no shit, right?
Thank
Oh,
you.
what's up, Tim?
Hey, what's up? So, our sales process is similar. I'm curious how you guys handle the very specific when you get to the end of your sales process, right? You guys have come to an agreement verbally because we had to improve this sales process. I'm curious how you guys handle it. Send them the Dropbox, sorry, the
Purchase
hello
agreement.
sign, the agreement. Are you leaving it in their hands to sign and come back, or you send up another call, say, hey, RJ, we come to an agreement. What time are you available, and when will you be in front of a computer so we can walk through this together to sign? Are you sending it right out and just hoping they sign? Because we find a lot of dropouts if we do that
Oh, yeah.
versus, hey, you're not getting this agreement until we're both on the phone.
Right.
Which one are you guys doing? How are you guys handling
So I would be a little weary of like strong arming them to like not even get it until we're on the phone. I think so here's like in our business, our preference is to get it going as fast as possible or live if we can. That doesn't always happen with just how life is. They're in the car, you know, we got crazy kids running around or something. Life just happens, right? And so in a perfect world, Tim, I would tell you every single time we review it on that call. And what I would do is at the beginning of the call, before we ever even got to price, I would ask them if they were home or near a computer. So that way you might not even get to price in the conversation until they were at a computer. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So early in the conversation, in like your framing, right? You could just be like, hey, got it, and are you prepared to, review a document together? Are you near a computer if it were gonna come to that, right? And they'll tell you yes or no. And that way you can get ahead of it before it ever even happens. Because what I wouldn't wanna do is like, man, it could just get a little weird if you were just like, hey man, I'm not sending this to you until you're at your computer. Right? Like that would spook me. I'd be like, all right, this dude's kind of tripping. Like, I don't know what he's on. But aside from that, if for whatever reason it doesn't make sense to sign it live, I would set really good expectations by either setting up a follow-up appointment as fast as humanly possible. Hey, so when are you going to be in front of a computer tonight? Again, assume the sale, lead with time, right? Okay, got it. Is 6 o'clock a good time for us to get back on the phone to review it together, right? And just get in there, right? My calendar's open at 5:30 or 6. Which one's better for you? You know what I mean? And just kind of assume it there. And then if that doesn't work, we just go super aggressive on our follow-up. I mean, like, we basically double, triple dial every day until they pick back up. Because in my mind, that's just free money. You know what I mean? I don't allow drop-offs at that point. We will literally keep a seller in one of our columns in our CRM if we got to a verbal where we follow up daily forever. Like I remember one time, someone on our team asked us, Ajay, how long do I follow up with this lead? And I said, either when they die or when we die, whichever happens first. And if they die first, call our probate attorney. So we just it's free money, right? And if they don't pick up, it takes 30 seconds to give them a call. So like, you might as well just call them every day.
Okay, perfect.
Great question.
Okay, so a question about, I don't know if it was really an objection, but it was a woman I talked to the other day, and she is looking at, she's sort of interested in selling, but not really because she just donated to a charity.
Okay.
So I put this up on RE Tipster and got some great comments, but I'm kind of wondering, like, what does that conversation really look like, though, when you're trying to build rapport with someone who, it's an expensive property, so clearly she doesn't need the money. But what's a good...
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would try to drill down on like why she wants to donate it to charity. Would be my question of like, is there a charity she's passionate about? Has she already picked one? Is it like an equestrian property and she like wants people to be able to race horses on it? Like what's going on this property? Because if it's just an expensive property, I would almost be like, well, does this charity know how to sell land? Right? Like I'd start with that and be like, well, I don't know. Okay. Do you even have do you have somewhere picked out? No. Okay, do you think a nonprofit or a charity would know how to sell a piece of property? Well, what I could do for you, Diana, is we could go ahead and get you a number for it. And in title, we could go ahead and set it up so the funds just go straight to charity rather than, them having to figure out how to sell this thing and it just basically turning into a headache for them. I'll just give you a price for it. I'll take care of everything. I'll make sure this is the easiest transaction of your life, but I don't want to cause a headache for a nonprofit, do you? And I just have that conversation with them. Again, if it were super niche, if it were, like somebody was passionate about horses and it was really pretty horse property and they wanted to do that, fine. I get that. That's a little bit tougher. But I would just drill down, try to get as much information out of her as possible. Because if she's just rich and is like, I just want to donate it to charity, I'd be like, cool, me too. Let's get them some money. I can give you that, right? They can use that a lot easier than they can this land, let me tell you, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, totally.
Hi, to piggyback off of that question, do you guys ever pick up land from nonprofits? Because I've heard that you can and that it can be pretty lucrative.
I have not. Has anybody in this room, Sid, have you picked up land from nonprofits? You're getting a mic.
I was on Habitat for Humanity board for about 10 years, and we sold property all the time.
Okay.
People donated, didn't fit. We could only build houses in certain areas.
So have you called them back and tried to buy some?
Yes.
Have you successfully?
No.
Ah.
But I haven't quit calling either.
All right.
Hey, Ajay.
What's up, Buck?
Putting on a great event, man. You look really good up there.
Thank you,
I
sir.
just wanted to say.
Thank you.
My question is, maybe I missed it when I went to the bathroom, and I apologize. Do you ever offer an alternate choice? Like, here's your cash fast close versus the, you want your number, it's going to take 90 days type thing. Have you experimented with that? And have you abandoned that, or are you using that in some cases?
Great question, Buck. I personally don't, is the short answer. And, there's no right or wrong here. What I can tell you is in our process, my preference is to always start with less money, right? And I think I prefer flipping and getting land at a deep discount if I can to trying to wholesale in 90 to 180 days because I have more uncertainty in trying to wholesale. So from a business execution perspective, I want to always present an opportunity where I make the most amount of money first. And so I'm just always going to lead with the flip price. I think the exception might be if I were doing blind offers because you might get a higher response rate. I'm not a direct mail expert. We've not done a lot of blind offers in a long time, so don't quote me on that. I know some other people in the room definitely have. Kyle Martin, if you're in here somewhere. I know you're doing texting and maybe some blind. Are you doing blind offers? So maybe we can ask Kyle when he's on the panel later. But if I am on the phone, I would just much rather start at our flip price, and then I just use timing as like an inverse objection, basically, to try to get ahead of it and pitch double closing. Because honestly, some people may not be comfortable with the double close at all, and this kind of leads the questioning so that they feel comfortable with it. Does that make sense? Yep. One more? Kaylee's telling me one more question. Who's got a really good, really juicy question? All right, here we go. Is it good? Is it a good question?
I don't know. You tell me.
Okay.
So question on the follow-ups. So I know you mentioned if you have a verbal offer, you'll follow up forever.
Yep.
But what happens if it's, say, during the due diligence phase or if it's like not so hot property? I'm assuming at some point you'll drop that lead from your...
So if it's at the point where, we're making an offer, we've probably done enough due diligence minus like some title work to know that we want to pursue it. If something in due diligence came up that made us not want to do the deal, we would either re-offer at a price that would make us want to do the deal or we would cancel.
Right. So what I'm asking is, at some point, if the seller is ghosting you, and you want to keep following up, but you also don't want to burn too much of your staff time. So how does that look like? At what point they drop off from your follow-ups?
Yeah, so let me ask, what does follow-up look like to you? Like when you say follow-up, what activity needs to happen?
essentially it's in a due diligence phase where you're like asking, you had a question and they never got back to you, kind of thing.
So we might be talking at two different phases. All right. So when I say we follow up for forever, it's under the assumption we've come to a verbal price. If it's gotten to that point in our sales process, we've done at least preliminary due diligence, checked road access, wetlands, floodplains. We probably called the counties, verified deeds, just like done all the preliminary stuff we can do in like an hour or under. We've checked out the property. We've looked at comps. We feel pretty confident, right? At this phase, there's only a few things that would cause us to drop off. It takes us 30 seconds to make a phone call. And so, and truthfully, like, how many leads are you adding every month to your verbal offer column? 3, 5, 7, right? So I might be adding 2 minutes a month to my overall queue. That's the perspective I look at it. Is 2 minutes a month worth me getting a random $250,000 pop on a lead? Yeah, I'd say so. I'm not too good to make, what's that times 30? That'd be that an hour. If someone wants to do the math. Ben, what's $250,000 times 30? 7.5 million, maybe? Something like that, right? My time's worth, like if I could make $7.5 million an hour, I would do that, right? Now, not every deal is going to be $250,000, right? But my point just being, it takes so little time to follow up with a lead that's not responding to you. It's 2 calls, right, until you get voicemail, maybe a minute. I'm okay doing that forever because truthfully, there aren't that many, right? Like you might have 9 in a column of people that got you verbals at any given time. What do you think is the max amount you've ever had, Veronica, in our contract out column? Maybe 5? Yeah, because eventually they pick up. That's the point, right? Eventually they answer the phone, they'll tell us to buzz off, they change their mind, something happens. Because when they know you're not going away, like I don't know how many times you guys have had some telemarketer reach out to you multiple times in a short period of time. After you recognize that number and see it for, I don't know about you guys, but for me it's like 3 days is when I get like, all right, this is annoying. I just need to tell them to stop calling me, right? And you tell them and they stop calling you. Our sellers are the same way. Just like, hey, I talked to my wife, we don't want to do it, right? And hopefully you can have a better conversation and overcome the objection. But most of the time, people just pick up eventually.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. What's that? I don't blame you. All right, sweet. That is all the time we've got for this discussion.